The text message on my phone screen made my hands shake so violently I nearly dropped it. Riley, you need to be out by tonight. Blake and Chloe need the space more than you do. Your father. Not Dad, not even Ethan. Just your father, like signing off on a business memo, instead of kicking his own daughter to the curb. I stared at those words, read them 3 times, 4 times, willing them to rearrange into something that made sense, something that didn't feel like a knife twisting in my gut. But they stayed the same, cold, final, dismissive. I was sitting in the corner booth of Grindhouse Coffee, the same place where I'd spent countless nights working on my art portfolio, dreaming of the day when my family might actually see me as more than their unpaid housekeeper and ate. The coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. Where would I even go? The apartment I'd been paying rent for, the one Dad said was helping out the family, wasn't actually mine. It was his. Everything was his. And now he was taking it back to give to my brother Blake and his fiancée Chloe, the golden couple who could do no wrong. If you're listening to the story and you've ever felt invisible in your own family, ever felt like the one who gives everything and gets nothing back, hit that like button. Subscribe, because what happens next is going to show you that being underestimated is actually the greatest gift your enemies can give you. Drop a comment telling me if you've ever been pushed to your breaking point, because trust me, you're going to want to hear how this ends. Let me take you back to the beginning to show you exactly how I ended up in that coffee shop at 2 in the morning, homeless and heartbroken, but about to become something none of them ever saw coming. Growing up as the middle child in the Vance family meant learning to read a room before you entered it. My older brother Blake was born when my parents were young and ambitious, still building their empire. He got the full force of their attention, their energy, their dreams. By the time I came along 5 years later, Dad was neck deep in expanding Carrington Financial Services, and Mom was managing the social obligations that came with new money, trying to look like old money. I wasn't planned, but I wasn't unwanted either. I was just there, a fact of life, like the weather or the gardener who came on Thursdays. Mom died when I was 17, a car accident on the Taconic that the police said was instant painless. I didn't believe them. Nothing about losing her was painless. She was driving home from my art show at school, the first one where I'd actually won an award. She had the ribbon in her purse when they found her. Read first place in mixed media. I never entered another competition after that. The grief hit Dad differently than it hit me or Blake. He became a ghost in his own house, present physically, but absent in every way that mattered. He'd sit at the dinner table and stare at Mom's empty chair fork, halfway to his mouth, like he'd forgotten how to complete the motion. Blake, who was 24 at the time, and supposedly learning the business, dealt with it by not dealing with it at all. He threw himself into New York nightlife, into expensive dinners and exclusive clubs, into a revolving door of girlfriends who all had the same hair color as Mom, if you squinted in dim light. I became the one who held everything together. Not because anyone asked me to, but because if I didn't, everything would have fallen apart. I learned to cook from YouTube videos at midnight, standing in the kitchen with my phone propped against the flour canister, trying to recreate Mom's pasta carbonara from memory. I learned to forge Dad's signature on school permission slips because he forgot to sign them. I learned to call Blake's landlord and make excuses when the rent was late, learned to intercept the angry calls from credit card companies, learned to be so quiet and helpful and invisible that they forgot I needed taking care of too. The first time I lent Blake money, I was 19. He called me at 2 in the morning, drunk and panicking because he'd lost $3,000 in a poker game, and the guys he was playing with weren't the kind who accepted IOUs. I emptied my savings account, the one I'd been building for college, for art school, for a future that suddenly seemed less important than keeping my brother's legs unbroken. He promised he'd pay me back within the month. That was 6 years ago. He never did pay me back. He never even said thank you. But I kept lending him money, kept bailing him out, kept making excuses for him to Dad, who was too buried in work to notice that his golden boy son was spiraling. I told myself it was what families did. I told myself Mom would have wanted us to stick together. I told myself that eventually they'd see what I was sacrificing and they'd appreciate it, value me. I was so incredibly stupid. By the time I was 23, I'd given up on art school entirely. The money I'd saved for tuition had gone to Blake's debts. The time I'd planned to spend developing my portfolio was spent managing household finances because Dad kept forgetting to pay bills. I took a job at Morrison's Fine Jewelry, a high-end store in Manhattan, where rich people bought engagement rings that cost more than I'd make in a year. I was good at it surprisingly. I could look at a couple and know exactly what they wanted, could guide them toward the perfect ring, could make them feel like they'd discovered something magical instead of just spending a lot of money. The manager, Mrs. Chen, was kind to me. She was 60-something, originally from Taiwan, and she'd built the store from nothing over 30 years. She saw something in me that my own family didn't. She taught me about stones, about cuts, and clarity about the difference between what something cost and what it was worth. She paid me fairly, gave me commissions, told me I had a gift for reading people. I should have been happy there, but I couldn't escape the weight of being needed at home. Dad started asking me to pay rent when I turned 21, said it would teach me responsibility. I didn't argue. I paid $600 a month to live in a house that should have been half mine. That would have been mine if Mom hadn't died intestate and Dad hadn't quietly moved everything into his name only. I paid and I cooked and I cleaned and I managed, and I told myself it was temporary. It was never temporary. Blake met Chloe at a charity gala 2 years ago. She was working as an event coordinator, all practice smiles and strategic networking. She had this way of laughing at men's jokes that made them feel like they were the funniest person alive, and Blake fell for it like a stone into water. I knew what she was immediately. I'd seen women like her at the jewelry store, the ones who came in with men twice their age, who knew exactly what carat size they deserved, who treated salespeople like furniture. But Blake was happy. Happier than I'd seen him since Mom died, and Dad approved because Chloe knew all the right things to say about business and legacy and family values. The first time Chloe stayed over, she went through the kitchen and made a list of everything that needed to be replaced. The pots and pans Mom had bought were too old. The china was outdated. The spice rack I'd organized was messy. She presented this list to Dad over breakfast like it was a professional consultation, and he actually thanked her for caring about the house. I stood there washing dishes, listening to her systematically dismantle my mother's kitchen, and I said nothing. That became my default mode, saying nothing while Chloe made changes. She moved in officially after 3 months, taking over the guest room, which had better light than my room. She'd stand in the doorway of my room, sometimes the one with the bay window and north-facing light that was perfect for painting, and she'd sigh wistfully. "This would make such a lovely closet," she'd say. "I have so many clothes and nowhere to put them." 2 months later, Dad asked me to switch rooms with her. Not asked, really, informed me. "Chloe needs more space, and you're barely here anyway with your job. It's just more practical." I moved to the smallest bedroom, the one that had been storage. It was barely big enough for a twin bed and a dresser. My art supplies went into boxes in the basement. My paintings came off the walls. I became even smaller, even more invisible, and I told myself it was fine. It was temporary. Blake and Chloe would get their own place soon. They never did. Why would they? They had a free house, free food, and a free maid in me. Chloe started criticizing my cooking within the first month of moving in. "Too heavy," she said. "Too many carbs." She was watching her figure. Blake needed to watch his figure, didn't. I know that heart disease ran in families. I started making separate meals, lighter things for them. My mother's recipes for myself when I ate alone in the kitchen after everyone else had finished. Then Chloe mentioned that it seemed wasteful to make 2 dinners, and maybe I should just adjust to healthier eating too. I adjusted. I always adjusted. Mom's china started disappearing. The good plates, the ones with the delicate floral pattern that had been her grandmother's. Chloe liked to use them for her dinner parties, liked to show off to her friends. 3 pieces broke in the first month. She didn't apologize, just shrugged and said they were old anyway, probably time for an upgrade. I found the broken pieces in the trash, carefully took them out when no one was looking, glued them back together in my room at midnight. They weren't perfect anymore. You could see the cracks, the places where they'd shattered, but they were whole. I kept them hidden in my closet, wrapped in newspaper, the last pieces of my mother that Chloe hadn't completely destroyed. The money got worse. Blake's spending had always been bad, but with Chloe it became catastrophic. She had expensive taste, and Blake wanted to give her everything. Designer clothes, luxury vacations, jewelry that I sold to him at cost, using my employee discount. He'd come into Morrison's with that sheepish smile, the one that used to work on Mom, and ask me to help him pick out something special. A bracelet, a necklace, a ring eventually. I helped him pick out Chloe's engagement ring on a Tuesday afternoon in March. He'd scheduled the appointment during my lunch break, and we spent an hour looking at diamonds. He wanted the biggest, the flashiest, the most expensive. I gently steered him towards something more elegant, a 2-carat emerald cut with a platinum band. It was still $20,000, and I used my employee discount to get him 15% off. He promised he'd pay me back the difference. He never did. But he did hug me after he bought it, squeezed me tight, and said, "You're the best, Riley. I don't know what I'd do without you." I held on to those words like a lifeline. He appreciated me. He just didn't know how to show it properly. Things would get better after the wedding, after they were settled, after the stress of planning was over. I told myself these lies and almost believed them. The engagement party was at Ridgeview Hall, a gorgeous venue, upstate with exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson. Dad spent $60,000 on it. Money I happened to know came from a business loan he'd taken out because Carrington Financial's cash flow had been tighter than he wanted to admit. But Blake wanted the best for Chloe, and Dad wanted everyone to see that the Vance family still had money and status and power. I worked that party. Not officially, I was technically a guest, but I spent the entire night running back and forth to the kitchen, refilling champagne glasses, making sure caterers had what they needed, entertaining Dad's business associates when they got bored with the speeches. I wore a dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, spent more than I should have, because I wanted to look like I belonged. I wanted to look like someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone who mattered. Nobody noticed. Chloe floated through the room in a white silk dress that cost more than my car, accepting congratulations like she was already royalty. Blake stood beside her, proud and oblivious, toasting to their future. Dad gave a speech about family and legacy and how happy he was to welcome Chloe into the Vance family. He mentioned Blake 7 times. He didn't mention me once. I was in the bathroom fixing my makeup after a catering emergency involving spilled red wine when Chloe and her friend Melissa came in. They didn't see me in the stall, or maybe they did and didn't care. "It's perfect," Chloe was saying, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "Once we're married, Ethan's going to deed us the house. Blake said he's already talked to him about it." "The whole house?" Melissa sounded impressed. "What about Blake's sister?" "Riley?" Chloe laughed, and it was not a kind sound. "She'll find her own place. Honestly, it's kind of pathetic that she's still living at home at 25. And she's been paying rent like a tenant, can you believe that? Her own family home, and she's paying to live there. Well, once we take over, that stops. She can go get a real apartment, maybe focus on growing up a little." "Does she know?" "Not yet, but Blake's father will talk to her. He's good at that kind of thing, making difficult conversations seem reasonable. She's always been very compliant from what Blake says. She'll understand." My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the toilet paper dispenser to stay still. I waited in that stall until I heard their heels click away, until I couldn't hear their laughter anymore. Then I came out and looked at myself in the mirror. My carefully applied makeup was smudged. My expensive dress looked cheap in the harsh bathroom lighting. I looked like someone playing dress-up, someone pretending to be something they weren't. I looked like a fool. But I went back to the party. I smiled through Dad's toast, smiled through Blake's thank you speech, where he called me his favorite sister, like it was a joke instead of just a fact. I smiled when Chloe pulled me aside near the end of the night and said, "Riley, we need to talk soon about living arrangements. Things are going to change after the wedding, and I think it's time you started thinking about your own future instead of always being around family." I smiled and said that sounded like a good idea, that I'd been thinking about it myself, actually. I lied so smoothly that even I almost believed it. Then I went home, went to my tiny storage room bedroom, and I cried until I threw up. But I still didn't leave. I still didn't stand up for myself. Because somewhere deep inside, in a place I didn't want to examine too closely, I still believed they'd choose me. I still believed that when push came to shove, my father would remember that I was his daughter too. My brother would remember all the times I'd saved him. They'd see how much I'd sacrificed, and it would matter. I was wrong, so devastatingly, completely wrong. The months leading up to the wedding were a blur of expenses and excuses. Chloe wanted everything perfect, which meant everything expensive. The dress imported from France cost $12,000. The flowers, exotic orchids that had to be flown in, specially cost $8,000. The photographer, the videographer, the string quartet, the ice sculpture, the designer invitations printed on handmade paper. The costs added up and up and up, and Dad paid for all of it without blinking. But he started asking me for more rent. My $600 a month became $800, then $1,000. When I hesitated, he sat me down and explained that I needed to contribute more now that I was making decent money at the jewelry store. Family helped. Family, he said. Didn't I want to help family? I paid. I always paid. I also paid for Blake's bachelor party in Atlantic City when his credit cards got declined. $3,000 for a weekend of gambling and bottle service, and Blake promised he'd pay me back after the wedding when he got his bonus from Carrington Financial. I later found out there was no bonus. Dad had actually cut his salary because Blake kept making bad trades that lost the firm money. I paid for Chloe's bridal shower, insisted on it actually, because I wanted to do something nice for my future sister-in-law. I wanted to show her I supported her, that I wasn't resentful, even though she'd taken my room and my mother's kitchen and my family's attention. $2,000 for a catered brunch at a country club, and Chloe spent the entire time complaining that the champagne wasn't the brand she'd requested and the flower arrangements were too matchy-matchy. She didn't say thank you. She did post 17 photos on Instagram, and I wasn't in any of them. 3 weeks before the wedding, Blake called me at work. He was crying, actually crying, which I'd only seen him do once before at Mom's funeral. He'd gambled away the deposit for the honeymoon, a 2-week trip to Bali that Chloe had been planning for months. Could I possibly lend him $5,000 just until his next paycheck? He'd definitely pay me back this time. He swore. I lent him the money. I emptied my savings account, the emergency fund I'd been slowly rebuilding, and I transferred it to his account. He thanked me profusely, told me I was saving his life, told me he'd never forget this. 2 days later, I got the text message. Riley, you need to be out by tonight. Blake and Chloe need the space more than you do. Your father. I stared at that message for 20 minutes, sitting in the back room at Morrison's during my break. I read it until the words stopped making sense, until they were just shapes on a screen. Then I called Dad. No answer. I called Blake. Straight to voicemail. I called the house phone and Chloe picked up. Oh, good, you got the message, she said brightly, like we were discussing lunch plans. Blake and I are moving into the master suite today. Well, my old room, but it'll be the master suite now. We need proper space for a married couple, and honestly, Riley, it's time. You're 25. Most people your age moved out years ago. Chloe, I pay rent here. I've been paying rent for 4 years. I cook, I clean, I've been covering expenses. And that's very sweet of you, but things change. We're starting our life together and we need space to grow. Your father agrees. Actually, it was his suggestion. He said you'd probably been wanting to move out anyway, but were too polite to say so. So really, we're doing you a favor. The words hit me like physical blows. It was his suggestion. Dad suggested throwing me out. Dad, who I'd taken care of since Mom died. Dad, whose house I'd run, whose life I'd managed, who I'd made myself small and quiet for. Where am I supposed to go? That's not really my problem, is it? Chloe's voice had gone cold, and I could picture her face, that smile she got when she'd won something. You're an adult. Figure it out. Your stuff will be in boxes by the front door. We're changing the locks tomorrow morning, so don't bother trying to come back. And Riley, you should probably stop being so dependent on family. It's not a good look. She hung up. I sat there in the back room of Morrison's, surrounded by velvet ring boxes and security tags, and I felt something crack inside me. Not my heart that had been breaking slowly for years. Something deeper, something fundamental. The part of me that believed in family, that believed in unconditional love, that believed I could sacrifice my way into mattering. That part died, and in its place something cold and sharp and angry was born. I could have called them back. I could have begged. I could have shown up at the house and cried and pleaded and promised to be even smaller, even quieter, even more useful. Part of me wanted to. The old Riley, the one who'd spent 8 years bending herself into shapes to fit their needs, wanted to do exactly that. But a new voice in my head, a voice that sounded like my own, but stronger, said, why should you? Why should I beg people who'd never valued me to please let me keep sacrificing for them? Why should I make myself smaller when they were the ones who should be ashamed? Why should I keep playing by rules that only applied to me? I pulled out my wallet and found the business card I'd been carrying for 10 months. Victor Thorne, founder and CEO, Thorne Capital. I'd met him at a charity auction, one of those rubber chicken dinners where rich people bid obscene amounts on signed guitars and weekend getaways. I'd been volunteering assigned to his table, making sure drinks were refilled and programs were available. There'd been an incident with another donor, a hedge fund manager named Marcus Pemberton, who'd had too much scotch and thought putting his hand on my thigh under the table was acceptable networking. I'd stood up, looked him in the eye, and said clearly enough for the entire table to hear, if you touch me again, I'll paint your portrait using your own blood. I'm very good with anatomical accuracy. The table had gone silent. Marcus had turned purple. And then Victor Thorne, this intimidating billionaire I'd been nervous to even approach, had laughed. A real laugh, the kind that transformed his severe face into something almost warm. "That's the most interesting thing anyone said all night," he'd said, looking at me like he was actually seeing me for the first time. "You're an artist." We'd talked for the rest of the evening. I'd shown him photos of my work on my phone, the mixed media pieces I did in stolen hours between shifts, combining painting with found objects and photography. He'd studied each image with the same intensity I'd seen him use looking at auction catalogs, and then he'd handed me his card. "If you ever want to do more than volunteer at charity events, call me. I'm always looking for people who know how to handle difficult situations with grace and threats." I'd kept that card for 10 months, too afraid to use it. What would a billionaire want with someone like me? What could I possibly offer someone who had everything? Now, sitting in that break room with nowhere to live and nothing left to lose, I realized what I could offer: information, dedication, and a willingness to learn from someone who clearly knew how power actually worked. I pulled out my phone and dialed before I could talk myself out of it. It rang twice. Victor Thorne. His voice was alert, professional. It was 2 in the morning. What kind of person answered their phone at 2 in the morning? "Mr. Thorne, this is Riley Vance. We met at the Children's Hospital benefit last year. I apologize for calling so late." There was a pause, and I could almost hear him thinking, placing me in his mental files. "Riley Vance, the artist who threatened Marcus Pemberton with anatomically accurate violence. I remember you quite well. It's not late if you're not asleep. What can I do for you?" The question was simple, but the way he asked it, calm and direct, made it clear he knew this wasn't a social call. I took a breath. "I need a job, and I need to learn how to destroy someone who thinks I'm too weak to fight back." The pause was longer this time. When he spoke again, I could hear interest, maybe even approval, in his voice. "That's quite a combination. Are we talking about hypothetical destruction, or do you have a specific target in mind?" "Very specific. Multiple targets, actually." "Family. How did you know?" "Because strangers don't usually inspire that particular combination of controlled fury and devastation. Only family can hurt you badly enough to want destruction. Come to my office tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Bring documentation of anything relevant. We'll talk. And Riley, call me Victor." He gave me the address and hung up. I sat there holding my phone, the break room suddenly too small and too bright, and I wondered what I'd just started. Then I called Sophia. Sophia Chen had been my roommate during community college, back before Dad decided I needed to stay home and manage the house full-time. She'd gone on to Columbia, then law school, and now she was a junior associate at one of those Manhattan firms with more names than sense. She was brilliant, ruthless in court, and the only person in my life who'd ever directly told me that my family was using me. I'd always defended them to her. Now I wondered why. She answered on the first ring. "Riley, what's wrong?" I told her everything. The text message, the call with Chloe, the years of paying rent and covering debts and making myself smaller. By the time I finished, she was swearing in Mandarin and English, mixing languages the way she only did when she was truly furious. "I'm coming to get you. Text me where you are. You're staying with me, and tomorrow we're going to figure out how to make them regret every decision they've ever made." "Sophia, I can't just crash on your couch." "You think I'm putting my friend on a couch? I have a guest room, Riley. It's literally just sitting there accumulating dust and my law school textbooks. Pack your stuff, I'll be there in 20 minutes. She was there in 15, pulling up in her sensible Honda with murder in her eyes and a baseball bat in her back seat. "Just in case anyone tries to stop us from getting your things," she said grimly. We drove to Westchester in tense silence. The house was dark when we arrived, all the windows black, like it was already empty of life. I used my key, half expecting Chloe to have changed the locks early despite her timeline. But the door opened, and there in the foyer, exactly as promised, were 3 cardboard boxes and my old duffel bag. My entire life in the Vance house, 25 years of existence, reduced to containers that could fit in a trunk. I started going through the boxes to see what they deemed worth keeping. My clothes, but not the nice ones, not the dress I'd worn to the engagement party, or any of the pieces I'd bought with my own money. Those were probably already in Chloe's closet. My books, but not Mom's cookbooks. Those were family property, apparently. Some framed photos, including one of Mom that had been on my nightstand, the last picture of her smiling. I clutched that to my chest. My art supplies weren't in the boxes. I went to the basement where I'd been storing them and found them thrown in a pile near the trash bins. Some of the paints had been opened, left uncapped, dried out. Brushes were bent and broken. Canvases were torn. It wasn't accidental damage. This was deliberate. Sophia saw my face and put a hand on my shoulder. Take what you can save. Leave the rest. They don't deserve your grief. But they did get my grief, whether they deserved it or not. I cried while packing the salvageable art supplies into boxes. I cried loading everything into Sophia's car. I cried walking through the house one last time, looking at the kitchen where Mom had taught me to make pasta. The living room where we used to watch movies as a family. The garden where she'd planted roses that still bloomed every summer without her. The house was full of ghosts, and I was about to become one of them. Before we left, I did 2 things. First, I took Mom's china from my closet, the broken pieces I'd glued back together. They were mine now, the only pieces of her they hadn't destroyed yet. Second, I went into Dad's office, the one room Chloe hadn't redecorated yet, and I took a small USB drive from my purse. I'd been backing up documents for months, every piece of financial information I'd seen lying around, every conversation I'd overheard about Carrington Financial. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it yet, but I had insurance now. Evidence. Proof. I plugged the USB drive into Dad's computer and spent 20 minutes copying files. Bank statements, client lists, investment reports, emails, everything I could find that might be useful later. Then I cleared the browser history, shut down the computer, and left the USB drive hidden in a book on his shelf. War and Peace, the one I knew he'd never actually read. If I needed it later, I knew where it was. If I didn't, well, it was a time capsule of his secrets. Sophia stood guard the entire time, watching the staircase like she expected Blake and Chloe to come down and find us. They didn't. The house stayed silent and dark, and we left it that way. When we got back to Sophia's apartment in Murray Hill, she pulled down the Murphy bed in her dining room and piled it with blankets and pillows. "Tomorrow you meet with Victor Thorne," she said, handing me water and Advil. "I Googled him while you were getting your stuff. Riley, do you know who he is? A venture capitalist. He's the venture capitalist, the guy who funded half of Silicon Valley. He's worth somewhere north of $3 billion, and he's known for being absolutely ruthless. People call him the Iceman because he never loses his temper, never loses a negotiation, and never ever forgets someone who crosses him. If he said he'd meet with you, he's interested. The question is why." I thought about that conversation at the charity auction, the way Victor had looked at my art, like he was solving a puzzle. I think he likes people who surprise him, and I think I surprised him. "Well, let's make sure you surprise him again tomorrow. We have 6 hours until dawn. Let's figure out exactly what you're going to say and exactly what you want." We stayed up all night. Sophia, with her legal training and sharp mind, helped me organize 8 years of resentment into something coherent and actionable. We made lists. Every debt Blake owed me documented with bank transfers and texts. Every expense I'd covered for the house tracked through my meticulous records. Every promise they'd broken, every sacrifice I'd made, all of it laid out in neat columns that Sophia said would hold up in court if necessary. "Riley, you've given your family over $65,000 in the last 3 years alone," Sophia said, staring at her laptop screen in disbelief. "That's not even counting the rent you paid or the value of the labor you provided. If you'd been investing this money instead of throwing it at their problems, you'd have a down payment on a house. You'd have a safety net. You'd have a future." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The numbers made it too real, too painful. I'd traded my future for people who'd thrown me away when I was no longer convenient. "But here's the thing," Sophia continued, and her voice got harder, sharper. "You can't sue family for being terrible. You can't take them to court for emotional damages or get back the money you gave them willingly. Legally, you have almost no recourse. Unless," she looked up at me, eyes bright with an idea, "unless we go at this from a different angle. If Victor Thorne can teach you business, if you can build something of your own, you don't need legal revenge. You can make them irrelevant." "I don't want them to be irrelevant," I said quietly. "I want them to know what they lost. I want them to feel it." Sophia smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile she used in court when she knew she had a winning argument. "Then let's make sure they feel it. Let's take everything they value and make it yours." By the time the sun came up, I had a plan. Not a complete plan, but the skeleton of one. A framework for what came next. I showered dressed in the nicest outfit I owned, a navy dress I'd bought for Mom's funeral and never had the heart to wear again. It seemed appropriate somehow, wearing something associated with death to the birth of whatever I was becoming. Sophia drove me to Midtown at 8:30. Victor's office was in one of those glass and steel towers that looked like it was trying to pierce the sky. The lobby was all marble and intimidation, with a security desk that took itself extremely seriously. I gave my name, and the guard's eyebrows rose slightly when whoever he called confirmed I was expected. He handed me a visitor badge and directed me to a private elevator bank. The elevator opened directly into Victor's office. Not a waiting room, not a reception area, but his actual office. It took up what had to be the entire top floor with floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides overlooking Central Park. The furniture was minimalist and expensive in that way that only truly wealthy people understand, where a simple chair costs more than a car because of the name of the designer and the quality of the materials. Victor was standing by the windows, looking out at the city spread beneath him like a map he was planning to conquer. He turned when I stepped out of the elevator, and I got my first really good look at him in natural light. 45 according to Sophia's research, but he could pass for younger. Silver hair, cut precisely sharp features, wearing a suit that had definitely never seen the inside of a department store. But it was his eyes that caught me. Gray, analytical, missing absolutely nothing. "Riley Mkwam," he said, walking over with his hand extended. His handshake was firm, professional, the grip of someone who knew exactly how much pressure to apply. "Coffee, tea, something stronger." "It's early, but I've learned never to judge people's coping mechanisms." "Coffee would be great, thank you." He poured from a French press sitting on a sideboard, handed me a mug that was warm and perfect. We sat in chairs facing the windows, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. I watched the city wake up beneath us, watched tiny cars crawl along tiny streets, watched people who looked like ants from this height go about their tiny lives. From up here, everything seemed manageable, solvable. "So," Victor said finally, his voice cutting through my thoughts, "tell me what happened." I did. I told him everything I'd told Sophia, but with more details. I showed him the documentation I'd brought, the bank statements and texts, and the timeline Sophia and I had built. He listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a tablet, his face giving away absolutely nothing. When I finished, he set down the tablet and looked at me directly. "Your father is Ethan Vance of Carrington Financial Services." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway, wondering where this was going. "I'm familiar with his firm. Old-fashioned, risk-averse, profitable, but stagnant. He's been running it the same way for 30 years, and it's only survived this long because he established solid relationships early on. But those relationships are aging out, and he hasn't adapted to bring in new blood or new strategies. Within 5 years, maybe less, Carrington Financial will be irrelevant in the market." "You've looked into them?" "I look into everything. It's my job to see opportunities and threats before other people do. Your father's firm is vulnerable, but it would take significant capital and inside knowledge to exploit those vulnerabilities properly. The kind of knowledge you'd have having grown up in that house, overhearing conversations, understanding how he thinks and operates." My heart started pounding. I saw where this was going. "What are you saying?" Victor smiled, and it was the kind of smile a wolf might give before it started hunting. "I'm saying that revenge is expensive and usually unsatisfying. You could expose their secrets, make a scene, tell everyone what they did to you. That's revenge. It would feel good for maybe a month, and then it would fade, and you'd be left with nothing but the reputation of someone bitter and vindictive." He leaned forward slightly, his gray eyes intense. "But justice done properly can be both profitable and permanent. If you want to hurt your family, if you want them to understand what they lost when they threw you away, you need to take something they value more than you. Your father values his company above everything, maybe even above his own children. Your brother values his lifestyle, his ability to coast on your father's name and reputation. Your future sister-in-law values the social status and financial security that comes with marrying into money. Take those things away systematically and legally, and you'll have their attention forever." "How?" "You work for me. I teach you everything I know about business, about leverage, about identifying weaknesses and exploiting them efficiently. In return, you give me information about Carrington Financial. We find every crack in your father's empire, and then we break it apart piece by piece. When we're done, you'll own what used to be his, and he'll spend the rest of his life understanding exactly what you were worth." I should have been shocked. I should have said no, that I couldn't possibly do that to my own father. But instead I asked, "Why would you help me? What do you get out of this besides information?" Victor sat back, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw something that might have been respect in his expression. "Smart question. Most people would have just said yes. I get several things. First, I get inside information on a company I've been interested in for years. Carrington Financial has clients and relationships that would be valuable to acquire, but Ethan Vance has refused every overture I've made. This gives me a way in. Second, I get to watch what happens when someone severely underestimates an opponent, which never stops being educational. And third, I get to work with someone who has real fire underneath a very calm surface. That's rare, Riley. Most people who've been beaten down stay down. But you called me at 2 in the morning and asked me to teach you how to destroy someone. That tells me you're not most people. He held out his hand. So, do we have a deal? I looked at his hand at the offer he was making. Part of me, the part that had been trained from childhood to be nice and accommodating and grateful for scraps, wanted to say no, wanted to take the high road, build a new life somewhere far away, and let my family fade into a memory I could pretend didn't hurt anymore. But that part was small now and getting smaller by the second. The larger part, the part that had been growing since I read Dad's text message, the part that had crystallized watching Sophia's face as she calculated how much I'd given away, wanted to watch them burn, wanted to make them understand, wanted justice. I shook his hand. We have a deal. What followed was the most intense 6 months of my entire life, and I'd thought years of managing my family's chaos had prepared me for intensity. I was wrong. Victor didn't believe in easing people into things. I started the next day 7 in the morning, and I didn't leave until past midnight. He had me shadow him in meetings, sit in on conference calls, read through prospectuses and financial reports until my eyes crossed and my brain felt like it was leaking out my ears. But I learned. God, I learned so much. His team was terrifying. A collection of frighteningly intelligent people who treated me with polite skepticism, at first clearly wondering what this random 25-year-old was doing in their sacred space. I could hear them whispering, see them exchanging glances. Who is she? Why is Victor wasting time on her? Is she sleeping with him? The last question made me furious, but Victor, who saw everything, pulled me aside after I overheard it. Ignore them, he said calmly. They're skeptical because they should be. I bring in plenty of people who don't work out. Prove you're different by being better than them, not by being offended. So I became better. I took notes. I asked questions. I stayed late going over files and records, teaching myself to read financial statements the way some people read novels. Turns out all those years of managing a household budget, of stretching every dollar, of figuring out creative solutions to impossible financial problems, had taught me more about resource management than I'd realized. Victor said I had an instinct for seeing waste, for spotting where money was being misallocated or misused. You see inefficiency like some people see color, he told me one day 3 weeks into my employment. It's not something I can teach. You either have it or you don't. You have it. He taught me how to weaponize that instinct. Showed me how to look at a company's financial statements and see not just what they were saying, but what they weren't saying. Taught me about corporate structure, about shell companies and holding companies and LLCs, about all the legal ways you could obscure who actually owned what. Taught me about leverage, about how to use small amounts of information or capital to move much larger things. I learned about patience too, about how to set up dominoes and wait months, sometimes years, for them to fall in the right sequence. Victor said most people failed at business not because they weren't smart enough, but because they weren't patient enough. They wanted immediate results, immediate satisfaction, and they missed opportunities that required playing the long game. Revenge is a dish best served cold, he quoted one day and then added, but justice is a dish that takes time to prepare properly. You can't microwave it. Victor paid me from day one and paid me well. Not charity money, not some insulting token salary. A real market rate wage based on someone with my growing skill set and the value I was bringing to his operations. The first month's paycheck made me cry. It was more than I'd made in 6 months at Morrison's, more money than I'd ever seen with my name on it that wasn't immediately earmarked for someone else's crisis. I moved out of Sophia's apartment and into my own place, a studio in Brooklyn that was small but entirely, completely mine. I bought furniture that I picked out, hung my salvaged paintings on walls that no one would criticize, cooked meals that I actually wanted to eat, instead of meals designed to please other people. I started therapy because Sophia insisted, found a therapist named Dr. Park, who was in her 60s with white hair and zero tolerance for self-pity. Why did you stay so long? She asked me in our 3rd session after I'd laid out the whole sad story. I thought if I could just be good enough, helpful enough, selfless enough, they'd love me the way I needed them to. I thought the problem was me not being enough, not them being incapable of seeing my value. And now I know that some people are fundamentally incapable of loving you the way you need to be loved. And staying doesn't change them. It just makes you smaller and smaller until there's nothing left. Dr. Park smiled. So what are you going to do instead? I'm going to make myself too big to ignore. While I was learning and growing and becoming someone new, someone I actually liked. Victor's team was systematically taking apart Carrington Financial. We started with research deep dives into every aspect of the company. We analyzed financial records that were publicly available, conducted interviews with former employees who were willing to talk, studied their investment strategies and client retention patterns. What we found was even worse than Victor had initially suspected, and he'd suspected plenty. Dad was running the company like it was still 1990, paper files instead of digital records. Outdated software that required manual data entry. Client relationships based entirely on handshakes and golf games, rather than actual performance metrics. He'd been hemorrhaging clients for 3 years, losing them to younger, more aggressive firms that offered better returns and modern service. He'd been covering the losses by taking on increasingly large amounts of debt and making riskier and riskier investments, trying desperately to maintain the appearance of stability and success. And Blake had been making everything exponentially worse. My brother, it turned out, had been using his position in the company to make trades that benefited his personal portfolio while exposing Carrington to massive risk. Nothing technically illegal, the lawyers assured me, but deeply unethical and potentially actionable if the board ever found out. He'd also been borrowing against the company's credit lines to cover personal expenses. Gambling debts, mostly. Because of course Blake gambled. Of course he had a problem. He'd been hiding another crisis he expected other people to manage for him. The house our family home was mortgaged to the absolute limit. Blake had taken out a massive loan using it as collateral, and according to the documentation Victor's team uncovered, he'd forged Dad's signature on the paperwork. That was actually illegal, properly fraudulent. The bank was getting nervous, starting to make increasingly pointed inquiries about repayment schedules and property equity assessments. Victor called me into his office one morning, 3 months into our arrangement. "I've found your opening," he said, pulling up documents on his massive monitor. "Your brother's loan on the house. The bank is going to call it in within 60 days. If your father can't pay, and he categorically can't based on what I'm seeing in Carrington's accounts, they'll foreclose. We can buy the debt from the bank, become the lien holder, and then offer to purchase the property outright. Clean, legal, and utterly devastating." "How much?" $800,000 for the debt, $1.2 million to purchase the property outright. It's actually worth closer to $2 million, but they'll be desperate. "I'll front the capital. You'll buy it through an LLC we'll set up in your name. By the time they realize what's happening, it'll be too late to stop it." I thought about that house, about Mom's garden, and the bay window where I used to paint. About being kicked out via text message, my belongings dumped in boxes by the front door like garbage. "Do it," I said without hesitation. The next piece of the puzzle was Ridgeview Hall, and this one was almost fun to arrange. Chloe had been posting about the wedding venue constantly on Instagram, showing off every detail of her planning, counting down the days until her perfect fairy tale wedding. The owner of Ridgeview Hall, a woman named Margaret Chen, who was no relation to Mrs. Chen, from the jewelry store, had been struggling financially since the pandemic shut down weddings for over a year. She'd been holding on by her fingernails, taking any booking she could get, slowly drowning in debt and deferred maintenance. Victor's team approached her with an offer, a full buyout, enough money to retire comfortably and travel like she'd always dreamed in exchange for immediate transfer of ownership. She accepted within 48 hours, and suddenly I was the owner of Ridgeview Hall. Chloe's dream venue, the perfect backdrop she'd been curating for Instagram, now belonged to the sister-in-law she'd helped throw out on the street. The irony was delicious. The last piece, the most important piece, was Carrington Financial itself. This required time and patience and a level of strategic thinking I hadn't known I possessed until I needed to. We needed 41% of the company's shares to gain controlling interest. Dad owned 40%. The rest was divided among 12 long-term investors, old men who'd been with Dad since the beginning of Carrington Financial. We started buying. Not directly, that would have immediately tipped our hand, and Dad would have fought back while he still could. We set up shell companies, LLCs, with innocuous names like Hudson River Holdings and New York Investment Partners. We approached investors quietly, privately, with offers they couldn't refuse. Some were easy to convince, like Henry Holden. Dad had screwed him over in a deal 20 years ago, something about a client list and a handshake agreement that Dad had conveniently forgotten when it suited him. Henry sold his 15% stake immediately and threw in some extremely damaging information about Dad's business practices as a bonus. He seemed to actively enjoy the idea of Dad losing control of his own company. Others took more work, more money, more negotiation, more careful presentation of the facts about Carrington Financial's actual financial situation versus the rosier picture Dad had been painting. We showed them the debt ratios, the client loss trends, the outdated systems. We made it clear that Dad was driving the company toward insolvency, and wouldn't they rather get out now with a premium on their shares instead of waiting for the inevitable collapse? One by one, they sold to us. It took 4 months and $20 million, most of it Victor's capital, though I was contributing everything I'd managed to save. By the end, we had 41% of Carrington Financial Services. I was the majority shareholder in my father's company, and he had absolutely no idea. During all of this, I maintained complete radio silence with my family, not a single text call or email. I blocked their numbers after the first week. When Blake sent me a message asking if I could possibly lend him another $5,000 for the wedding caterer, apparently having completely forgotten that he'd had me evicted. The audacity would have been funny if it hadn't been so infuriating and so perfectly on brand. Sophia monitored their social media for me, keeping tabs on their lives, so I'd know what was coming and when to strike for maximum impact. Chloe's Instagram was a masterclass in performative happiness. Every single post was about the wedding, about her love story with Blake, about how blessed and grateful she was to be joining such a wonderful established family. The comments were full of congratulations and heart emojis. Nobody knew that the wonderful family had kicked out a daughter to make room for her. Nobody cared enough to ask questions. Blake posted less frequently, but when he did, it was always something expensive. A new Rolex, a weekend in the Hamptons at someone's beach house, dinner at restaurants with multiple Michelin stars. Every post was a brag of Flex showing off a lifestyle he couldn't actually afford, building a house of cards that would eventually collapse under its own weight. Dad didn't do social media, but Sophia found an interview he'd done with a financial trade publication about legacy and values in modern financial services. In it, he talked extensively about building something to pass down to future generations, about the importance of family and business, about teaching the next generation to value relationships over transactions. He mentioned Blake by name 7 times, talking about grooming him to eventually take over the company. He didn't mention me at all, not once, like I'd never existed. Perfect. Let them forget I existed. Let them get comfortable in my absence. Let them build their futures on foundations they didn't realize were already crumbling. The reminder when it came would hit so much harder. The night before I went back to the house, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my Brooklyn studio staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. I thought about Mom and wondered what she would think of what I was doing. She'd loved Dad despite his flaws. She'd loved Blake despite his weakness. She'd held our family together through sheer force of will and unconditional love. Would she understand why I was doing this? Would she think I was being vindictive and cruel? Or would she see it for what it was? A daughter finally standing up for herself after years of being walked on. I'd never know. All I had was my own moral compass and the cold, hard satisfaction of a plan coming together perfectly. I got up at 5 in the morning, showered, spent over an hour on my appearance. The suit I chose was new, purchased specifically for this day. Charcoal gray, tailored within an inch of its life, with a silk shell underneath. Victor had insisted I build a complete professional wardrobe, had taken me to his personal tailor, explained that looking powerful was half the battle in business. My hair was professionally styled, makeup subtle but perfect heels that added 3 inches to my height and made me feel like I could conquer the world. When I looked in the mirror, I genuinely didn't recognize myself. This woman looked confident, successful, like someone who belonged in boardrooms and corner offices making decisions that affected thousands of lives. She looked like someone who couldn't be dismissed with a text message, someone who couldn't be erased or ignored or thrown away. She looked like someone who could burn your entire life down and smile while doing it. Victor picked me up at 7 in his Cadillac Escalade with a second car following behind, carrying his legal team. The drive to Westchester was quiet. He didn't try to prep me or give me a pep talk or ask if I was sure about this. He just handed me a coffee black with 2 sugars because he paid attention to those kinds of details and let me sit with my thoughts. When we pulled into the driveway of my family's house, I felt my heart rate spike. This was it. This was the moment where everything changed. I took a deep breath, opened the car door, and stepped out onto the pavement. Blake was outside doing something with the garden hose, probably trying to look responsible and domestic for Chloe. He looked up when he heard the car, and I watched his brain try to process what he was seeing. His little sister, who he'd last seen as a broke, desperate girl, begging for scraps, stepping out of a luxury vehicle in a suit that cost more than his monthly car payment. The hose dropped from his hands. Water pooled across the driveway, forgotten. Chloe came running out, probably ready to complain about something inconsequential, and stopped dead when she saw me. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. For once in her performative life, she had absolutely nothing to say. Dad came out, last coffee mug in hand, probably wondering what the commotion was about. When he saw me, he actually flinched. When he saw Victor Thorne step out of the car behind me, one of the most powerful men in New York finance. The coffee mug slipped from his fingers and shattered on the stone steps, coffee spreading across the white stone like a bloodstain. I didn't speak. Not yet. I just walked toward them, my heels clicking on the driveway in a steady, confident rhythm. And I let them see me. Really see me, maybe for the first time in my entire life. I walked past them into the house, into what was legally my house now, and I heard Dad stammer behind me. "Riley, what are you doing here?" And Mr. Thorne, "I don't understand what's going on. I wasn't aware we had a meeting scheduled." I stopped in the foyer, the same foyer where they'd left my belongings in boxes like trash, and I turned to face the three of them. They looked smaller, somehow less significant than they had in my memories. Blake was pale, already sweating despite the cool morning. Chloe was clutching his arm like she needed physical support. Dad looked old and confused, like he'd aged a decade overnight. I came to collect a few things I left behind. I said, my voice calm and professional. And to deliver some news you should probably hear in person. You can't just show up here with him. Blake gestured wildly at Victor like he was radioactive, and act like you own the place. This is still Dad's house, our house. But I do own the place, I said, and I pulled the deed from my briefcase with a magician's flourish, held it up so they could see the official seal, the signatures, the documentation. As of yesterday afternoon, this house belongs to me. I bought it from the bank when they were about to foreclose on the fraudulent loan you took out, Blake. The loan you secured using forged documents and Dad's signature. That's actual fraud, by the way. We have copies of everything if you'd like to examine them. The silence was absolute and devastating. Blake's face went from pale to gray. Chloe made a strangled sound in the back of her throat. Dad reached out, grabbed the doorframe for support. "You're lying," Chloe said, but her voice shook badly enough that even she didn't sound convinced. "Blake, she's lying. Tell her she's lying." Blake couldn't even look at her. He just stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "I'm not lying," I said calmly. "Every document is legal, filed and sealed with the county clerk." The bank was ecstatic to take my cash offer. Cash purchase, immediate close, no contingencies. This house is mine. The mortgage is completely paid off. And according to New York state law, you have 30 days to vacate the premises. Dad found his voice finally, and it came out broken and raw. "Riley, you can't do this. This is our home, your mother's home. You wouldn't be this cruel. You're not this person." The word cruel hit me like a physical slap, but I didn't let them see it land. I'd practiced this, rehearsed staying calm no matter what they said. "Cruel," I repeated softly, tasting the word. "Cruel is kicking your daughter out via text message with no warning, no explanation, no conversation. Cruel is taking advantage of someone's love and loyalty for 8 solid years, and then discarding them the second they're no longer convenient. Cruel is making me pay rent to live in my own family home, while you let my brother gamble it away to cover his addiction. I'm not being cruel, Dad. I'm being clear. You taught me that business is business. That sentiment has no place in financial transactions. So here's the transaction. This house is mine now. You're tenants. Your lease is up in 30 days. I suggest you start looking for alternative accommodations." Before anyone could respond, Victor's assistant, Catherine, stepped forward with a manila envelope. She was efficient and professional, and she handed one envelope to each of them. "These are the official eviction notices," she said in a voice that suggested she'd done this hundreds of times. "You'll also find information about tenant rights and the legal process. Everything is in perfect order." Blake exploded. "This is insane. You can't do this. Dad, do something. Call our lawyers. This can't be legal." But Dad just stood there looking at the deed in my hands like it was written in ancient hieroglyphics. "How did you afford this? Where did you get this kind of money?" "I got a job," I said simply. "A real one, not some fake position at a family company. Turns out I'm actually quite valuable when I'm not wasting my time and talent trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it." Mr. Thorne recognized my potential and gave me an opportunity. I took it. And I've spent the last 6 months learning how to do exactly what I'm doing right now. Chloe had recovered enough to get angry, her face flushing red. This is because of me, isn't it? This is all because you're jealous. You're jealous that Blake chose me instead of you. You're jealous of our happiness. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no hurt, not even the satisfaction I'd expected to feel. Just cold, clear purpose. This has nothing to do with you, Chloe. You're just collateral damage in a much larger situation. Blake is the one who gambled away this house. Dad is the one who chose to throw me out rather than hold his precious son accountable for his actions. You're just the catalyst that finally exposed what they really thought of me. So no, I'm not jealous of you. I actually pity you. You're about to marry into a family that's falling apart and you don't even know it yet. I walked past them up the stairs to my old room. Chloe had completely redecorated as I'd known she would. The bay window that used to let in perfect north light was covered with heavy velvet drapes, blocking it out entirely. All my paintings were gone, my mother's things packed away or thrown out or claimed as Chloe's own. The room was unrecognizable, sterile, and generic, like I'd never existed there at all. Like 8 years of my life in that room had been erased with fresh paint and new furniture. I went to the closet, moved aside the boxes of shoes Chloe had stacked there, and found what I was looking for. The duffel bag I deliberately left behind 6 months ago, with the USB drive still hidden in the side pocket where I'd sewn it in. I pulled it out, checked that it was intact, and put it carefully in my purse. Insurance in case things got even messier. Then I grabbed one more thing. Mom's china, the 3 pieces I'd rescued and glued back together, carefully hidden behind winter coats. They weren't perfect anymore. You could see every crack, every place where they'd shattered, but they were whole. They'd survived, just like I had. When I came back downstairs, Blake was shouting at Dad. Chloe was crying real tears for once, and Dad looked like he'd aged 20 years in 20 minutes. They barely noticed when I walked past them toward the door. "Riley, wait," Dad called out, and I stopped. Turned. Gave him one last chance to say something that mattered, something real. "We need to talk about this. You're being irrational, emotional. Think about your mother. Think about what she would want you to do, Cow." I smiled, but it wasn't kind. It was the smile of someone who'd finally stopped caring what other people wanted. I am thinking about her. She'd want me to stop setting myself on fire to keep other people warm. She'd want me to value myself the way she valued me. And she'd want me to understand that sometimes love isn't enough, and you have to walk away before there's nothing left of you to save. I left, then walked out of that house for the second time. But this time was entirely different. This time I was in control. This time I had power. This time they were the ones being left behind. The ones scrambling to figure out what had just happened. The ones whose future had just been yanked out from under them. Victor was waiting by the car. "Well done, how do you feel?" "Unfinished," I said because it was true. "We're not done yet." He smiled. "No, we're definitely not done yet." The next target was the wedding venue, but timing mattered. The wedding was still 2 weeks away, and I wanted them to feel secure first. I wanted Chloe to keep planning, keep posting, keep believing her perfect day was going to happen exactly as she'd envisioned. The fall always hurt more from a greater height. In the meantime, we had a company to acquire and a board meeting to orchestrate. So here's my question for you. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever been told you weren't enough, that you didn't matter? That you should be grateful for scraps? What did you do about it? Drop a comment and let me know. Because I want to hear your story. And if this resonated with you, if you're tired of being invisible in your own life, hit that like button and subscribe. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is being pushed out of a place that never deserved you in the first place. Because that's when you find out what you're really made of. Remember, being underestimated isn't a weakness, it's a weapon. And nobody sees the blade coming when they think you're not even holding a knife.